In this video, we're going to make sure that our graph looks perfect. We're going to add titles and labels and units, and I'm going to show you a few things about how to fix some common problems you might be having with your graph. So if you watched the last video, you might have noticed that I changed a few things about my second experiment in order to make the graph do something that I want you to see. So I've changed some of the details about the numbers, but it's okay. I want you to, you'll pick up what I'm going for here. So I've got my throwaway table like we made in the last video, and I'm going to now throw it into a chart. So I do insert chart, and as you probably remember from the last video as well, we need to make a line graph from this. Now here's the first thing that I want to show you. I purposely left units in my throwaway table, and in the last video I told you don't do that, and I want you to see what happened because it looks like everything's going well. It goes from 0 to 10 to 30, but the space between 0 and 10 is 10, but the space between 10 and 30, there's 20 grams in between those two things. But do you see how the computer has spaced them equally? And so the reason why it's done that is because the computer interprets these as words and not numbers. So in order to fix that, you have to get rid of all of the letters in each of these labels, and then do your insert chart, and everything should look much better like that. So now it's spaced everything correctly. So that's if I leave notes on your paper about scaling, that's what I'm talking about. The next issue, especially if you were doing the Trolley Track Lab, is you might not notice that your y-axis doesn't start at 0. So because it's starting at 7 and going to 13, we're kind of zoomed in on the y-axis, and we need to zoom it back out. So the way that you do that is you go over to Customize, and you're going to do vertical axis. One of the second to last option is vertical axis. And if you scroll down just a little bit, there's a spot where you can tell the computer, I want my minimum value to be 0. And you just type in 0 and it readjusts the y-axis. Okay, so now we've got our scale set up correctly. Our x scale and our y scale are now correctly set up. Now we need to do some labels. So back over to Customize. The second option is Chart and Axis Titles. So inside of here, there's a spot where right at the top where it says Type. And you can pick from either the title or either of the axes, and you can even add a subtitle if you're into that. I'm just going to start off on the title. Right now it's labeled as average, and that is definitely not the right title. Usually you can name these graphs the same as whatever you gave the table. So my table was amount of protein supplement per day versus number of large eggs. That seems pretty good, so I'm going to add that. Okay, so I've got my title put in there. Next up, I need to put in my axes. So I'm going to go with my horizontal axis first. My horizontal axis was amount of grams of protein. And now if you don't put in a unit, all you have is your label, you're going to lose credit on that. So since this is in the title, it says grams of protein, that's already set to go. But if you had just said amount of protein, now you need a unit, and so you'd have to put in parentheses grams. Either approach would be fine. Lastly, we need to put in the vertical axis. Right now it's labeled as average. That's not going to do it either. So this was number of large eggs. Okay, so we've got our graph all set up, ready to go. There's one last kind of picky thing that you might be interested in changing, just because especially if you're doing science fair. Since we only have one line on this graph, we're only graphing one average. The legend right here where it says the blue line is average is really unnecessary. So you can go back and fix that by going back to Customize, and then there's the option that says legend. And where it says position instead of right, you can say none. And then it uses your space a little bit better also.